Good morning.
Hello, Garrick.
How's it going?
Good. This is back in the saddle again after a very long hiatus.
Summer vacation.
I have a little bit of a verbal issue with the word hiatus. I always want to say hibiscus. After a very long hibiscus, yeah, it's a plant, not also a tea. Which
you make tea out of it, yeah.
Do you know is hibiscus tea made from the hibiscus plant?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay.
I believe also it is. There's the aguas frescas, which I think is called jamaica, yep. And I believe that's made from jamaica is made from hibiscus. They call it jamaica,
Jamaica.
So it must be like a Caribbean type flower, or a tropical flower or something.
Huh. Well, I'm really glad that people are tuning in for this conversation. Let me tell you, after not talking since June or July, and we start off with hibiscus tea conversation.
Yeah, that was weird. Hey, I've got a topic to get us kicked off.
All right.
People who are not aware of this world should, we apologize, but at the same time, you should then learn about this world. But the party ended. Robert L. Keane retired from touring after 41 years. Yeah. If you're not familiar, who Robert L. Keane is, a Texas singer songwriter who probably has written some of the seminal Texas folk / country songs.
Which we should be clear that when we say Texas country folk songs,
yeah,
it doesn't mean that it is unrelated to the rest of the country or doesn't have impact upon the rest of the country, because these artists actually have huge influence all over the country.
Yes, exactly.
Because their style and attitude and different genres makes it into other stuff. So
yeah, exactly.
It's let's say influential subversively or an undercurrent.
Yeah. So yeah, because kind of like you might call it outlaw country, it one of the one of the kings of that movement. One of the he's kind of like Willie Nelson, Chris Christopherson, and then the next generation is really him and Lyle Lovett. Yeah. And if you talk to anyone who's writing songs in that genre, or even outside of that genre, they're influenced by Robert L. Keane. He wrote some great stuff.
Yeah.
I was listening to a great podcast called Walking the Floor by Chris Shiflett, who is the guitar player for the Foo Fighters, but he has a big interest in particularly Texas country music, outlaw country, and he actually puts out independent album, his own solo albums are in that vein. And he interviewed Robert L. Keane, and he asked him this question, which I think was very, very fascinating, because he's like, he said basically Texas and probably Oklahoma by being close is the only place in America where Texas has its own thriving music scene, and you don't ever even have to leave Texas to make a living because it's so big. And Chris Shiflett was trying to understand that, and how how that's developed, and how I think that's important for people to understand too as well, that while this is an influential movement across the country, in some sense Texas is so big and has such a deep culture of storytelling and music that actually a lot of these artists don't need to go that far out of this area, and they can make a really good living and be very famous.
So I think it'd be a really cool PhD to do a comparison of storytelling in places like Ireland and Texas.
Yeah.
The Irish have always had an amazing storytelling ability. Interestingly enough, recently talking to an Irish friend, they feel that the Irish ability to tell stories is waning because they're no longer oppressed in the same way they were under the English for hundreds and thousands of years, because his theory was that they got really good at storytelling because it was the only way to express yourself. And and as they've become more affluent, storytelling has decreased significantly. Now, I'm sure I don't know that.
Interesting.
I don't know how much that's the case, but I do wonder how, as Texas becomes affluent now in ways that it wasn't for a long time. I mean, there's always the Texas independence movement, and I'm always kind of like, do you really want to go back to those days? Because it wasn't that great. But Texas traditionally wasn't just a very rich place. It turned into that with oil, and then now tech boom and different stuff. And as people move in, I do wonder if it's going to change. I think the tradition's still there, but I don't know.
I don't know. I think that's an interesting question. But at the end of the day, I think even though we're living in the Netflix world, what I realized when I went back when I was in Texas this summer is no, there's still a huge market for that, for people getting together, telling stories, singing songs, and for songwriters to tell those stories. And I think it's all tied to tradition, but I think so. My guess is in Ireland, okay, so there may be a change there, but my guess is still at the end of the day, somewhere right now, well, it's pretty early in the morning, but somewhere, hundreds, if not thousands of people are driving home all across Texas from bars or wherever it was where they heard some guy guitar on a stage telling stories, jokes, and singing songs.
That's true.
And I think there's just such a need for that. As much as we talk about, this world of like being online, you and I have experienced. I mean, that's the kind of Camino experience, right? I mean, you and I both have this bet that the Camino isn't going to go away anytime soon. It's going to grow because people have this need to sit around the campfire or a fire, cook some raw meat, and tell stories and talk and share life. And so I think there's something core to us. I think when we get away from that, then I'll be worried. Then I think we're on the edges of dehumanization.
Yeah, that's true. And I guess the Texas storytelling tradition is different than the where it arose from is different than the Irish.
But that's a good point. But it comes out of that. I mean, that's the Irish brought all that over. Thank God for the Irish. The Irish.
Thank God for the Irish.
Saved civilization many times over.
My mother's maiden name is Macaulay. My children were born in Sweden. Their grandmother is Swedish. But they technically have more Irish blood in them than Swedish because my wife's dad was also Irish, and my mom was fully Irish, and my dad had some as well, I think. So anyway, but we haven't done the genetic testing, but who needs that?
Yeah.
Often wrong, never in doubt. Am I? Speaking of being often wrong and never in doubt.
Wait, hold on. So let's wrap up one thing with Robert O'Keefe.
Sorry.
Because people out there may be going, who is this guy? So you recommend one song, and I'll recommend one song that if you should go listen to understand. I'll say Corpus Christi Bay. Great tragic comic song.
That's a great song. Man, I mean, he's got so many. And now that you put me on the spot, what one do I? Okay, if you want one that will bring back an illicit response for me, definitely Coming Home. That's fantastic. You can't beat it. But then there's things like Gringo Honeymoon. Honeymoon. Fantastic song. There's I think one of his most underrated songs has always been Mr. Wolf and Mama Bear. That's storytelling at its finest, in my opinion, because there's so much play going on, and like, what on earth is this? And it's just an interesting song. And then of course his famous The Road Goes On Forever. Not the most wholesome of songs, but definitely it's storytelling.
Neither is Corpus Christi Bay. It's storytelling, and
it is Texas country after all. It's not going to be necessarily wholesome.
If you're looking for anyway or Merry Christmas from the Family, also not but that's a great song. So if you're interested in good songwriting, go check out a little Robert O'Keefe, check out those songs, and
worth your while. For slightly offbeat vocals, and not offbeat, but just it's not, he's not Barbara Streisand, but no, he's fantastic. Okay. Well, speaking of often wrong, never in doubt, let's talk about leadership. So
leadership.
Leadership just isn't just a river in Egypt. It's I don't know how to start this. So I'm afraid to start it because I feel like I'll push it in the direction. But lately, now I've spent a good deal of my adult life in leadership, so this might explain maybe some of my. And I even have a degree in
Yes, so do I.
leadership,
As do I. As
an
do I.
advanced degree. I am a
Yeah.
master in
Yeah.
Christian leadership. So obviously it's important. If one were to do a quick scroll through of all the leadership podcasts that are out there, it would be probably in the millions.
It's a lot. It's a lot. There's a lot of information in the business world, in the private sector, in the Christian world. There's a lot of literature. Yeah.
And okay, leadership is important. Definitely. Who was it? Well, we have a friend who's in a country in the world who's a missionary, and during some of the world crises, said, our country doesn't have a financial problem; they have a leadership problem. So leadership's important. His perspective was that you suffer from bad leadership. So definitely, leadership is important. So from the get-go, anything that happens to be soaked in my cynicism that I might say in this podcast, I just want to say from the get-go, it's incredibly important.
Yeah.
However, I sometimes feel that we spend an awful lot of time talking about leadership, but yet very few people understand it. And much of the information we spend talking about is misunderstood or misappropriated or unnecessary and maybe unhelpful.
Yep. Well,
that's a big statement.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I'll second that. I'll also raise you that it feels like in the Christian world there's a crisis of leadership.
Yes,
in a lot of ways. There's if you spend a long time there's a lot of major failure which have destroyed lives and ministries and churches. But there's also been I think there's a strong sense of leadership styles in American evangelicalism, which often borrow from the American culture, right? John Wayne, Cowboys, the kind of our image of what a good leader should be, football, a quarterback, a coach, and those aren't always. I don't think those are biblical. Those aren't necessarily wrong, you know what I mean? But that becomes our kind of defining. If you think about a lot of leadership, it's but I don't think those are biblical. I don't necessarily think those are all bad, but they're not maybe centered in Christ.
Yeah, I was about to say. I feel like, how do I want to be careful? Many times, sometimes, it seems like pastors of megachurch look more like Bobby Knight than a than a true model of Christ-like leadership.
Yeah.
So here's why I feel qualified to make that remark. So recently, there have been any number of pick your megachurch pastor who in some way has failed or been asked to step down. I was listening to a podcast the other day about a church in Boulder, where the pastor had been forced on sabbatical and kind of came back. It was actually a really cool story. This was on the Carrie Newhoff podcast. And anyway, I often find that I resonate with a lot of these pastors, or at least on the outside. Like when I see the tendencies in them, I actually can find those tendencies in me.
Sure.
As far as you're just going to take things, you take the bull by the horns. We're going to push this rock up the hill. We're going to get this done. Everybody fall in line behind me. I'm going to put you on my back and we're going to achieve this. Now, some of you out there may be listening going, that's arrogant. And the answer is yes. I have quite a streak of arrogance in me that I repent of daily. But oftentimes when you and I were just talking about one pastor, we won't name him beforehand, but who has kind of left and had to step down, or I don't know the exact details of it, but just some not good stuff there. Bullying mostly, I think, or just being an all around jerk.
Yeah.
Okay, but let's take those and put those aside. Okay, so there is this tendency maybe within Christians, because I don't think it's just unique to America, although the grandiose is particularly American, but like I don't know. I think in other cultures it's starting to set in. I think you could kind of see the Uber leader. It's more power dynamic in let's say African cultures.
Or Latin American, where there's high authority,
right? Machismo, yeah. But I mean, so it's there, right? So it's going to take off different forms. Okay.
Yeah. In different cultures, it's gonna look, So this isn't necessarily a critique of America, but it's just saying America has its own culture and it has its own leadership styles or issues, and those are going to get played out in a lot of areas. And so, for the good and the bad, I'm not. So I think there's some positive great American leadership, right? That's what that is about, essentially. And there's a lot of positive about that, that doesn't happen in other cultures. But then there's a dark side. Every culture has, positives, negatives, and neutrals, and in how things work out.
Yeah. So I think one of my main concerns, there's two different perspectives. There's, let's say, business world literature and perspective on leadership, and then there's the Christian, let's say, world perspective on leadership. Sometimes in the Venn diagram there's great overlap. Sometimes maybe there's not at all. Here's the deal. I am concerned that we, within Christianity, especially within movements that are more activist movements, we spend way too much time focused on skill set and attributes of kind of backwards engineering your way into leadership, or quote unquote good leadership, and very little time on character building.
So I'll raise you on that. I love crew. I love organization. I think our leadership training is woefully inadequate because it focuses mainly on skills and roles. If you look at it, and so this is where my case, and I would make this emphatically, is the business world is more Christian than a lot of what I'm seeing in Christian literature. Just flat out say it. Now, not all. There's some great stuff in Christian literature, but what gets played out in churches, you got to be a CEO. This role, these things you do, how to do it, and there's a little bit of information about your heart and who you are in Christ, but very, very little. It's very quick. It's a wash, and I think part of that is that people assume that's going to be a part that's going to be fixed, but part of it is because we wrote all this material or thought about all this material in the 50s, 60s, 70s when we were looking to the business world, and now the business world switched. Business world, you go to Harvard, they're teaching you servant leadership. They're teaching empowering people. They're teaching. Now, I think crew right now. So this is not, once again, I'm not trying to be too critical of I love crew, but I think they're trying to change that now. I think there's some awareness of needing to. But when I talk to business leaders, big time people who I know, they don't talk about skills anymore. They talk about building trust. They talk about relationships. They talk about how you treat people, and that's what's being taught at Harvard Business. This is being taught at Wharton. Yeah, they're learning the skills too, but the principal aspects of leadership right now, anywhere, it's all about relationships. It's all about character. It's all about service. And those are the companies that are doing better. But you go to our side of things, and where I see in a lot of places now, there's some great ministries and organizations that are focused on servant leadership, but a lot of places I think it's short shrift. It's very quickly, how do you do it, and what is your role? And so I 100% agree with you, but I just would add that we need to get on track with what's being taught at Harvard Business, because they're teaching what we should be teaching.
So what is it, do you think, why is it, do you think that you mentioned that this was written in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, I'd say
or
80s.
At least it comes out of that,
Yeah,
maybe that
it
wasn't
comes
written,
out of
but
that, maybe the
that's what
attitude.
it's thinking. Yeah.
So, but why do you think, because I don't think it's just unique to Cru. I think you could go down any number of Christian organizations. I think churches.
Yeah.
Why do churches, and maybe they're different reasons, but why do churches allow a dynamic bully to be in leadership for so long?
Well, I do want to be careful here. I'm not saying that Cru has dynamic bullies in charge.
No.
We have great leaders and great. I just think we don't. I think we're not equipped to really deal with. It's very much a thinking of the 50s and 60s, which is there's a box, and we can train everyone to fit in that box. And if we've got everyone fit in those boxes, then the movement will move forward, at rapid speed. So I think part of it is that.
What do you mean by that? Flesh that out.
If we train everyone the same way to do the same things, the same skill set, that these are the skills that we need to do. And you hear that a lot, right? Like, these are the skills that will get us to the next level as organizations. So that makes total sense. But what it failed to realize was I don't necessarily think that's how leadership works. It was a model that worked really well post World War II in the baby boom generation, when you could put processes together and train people a certain way, and you would come out on top generally, right? And so so the church exploded in that time frame. Now, I don't think that methodology of training leadership and training workers was as effective as we think it was. It was effective, but the church exploded. So we look back at that and go, our best successes in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s were because we trained people rapidly, quickly to do A, B, C, and D. If you do A, B, C, and D, if you know these things, and if you understand your role as you fit organization, then it'll go. The church planning model, was CEO, pastor. You get a good preacher, you get the right location. It was very, methodical and process oriented. And so once again, I'm not necessarily saying that was bad, but that was it lacked. It had some disadvantages. It had some great advantages, which was phenomenal explosive growth, right? But then with that came the dark side of that, which is a lot of moral failure or bad leadership. And I think what you're getting at is that why do we let pastors who clearly from the outside you're looking at, this looks abusive or this looks weird. It was the rise of celebrity pastors became part of this too, but CEO, celebrity, and I'm not saying some of those guys are amazing people, and like Rick Warren. Look at Rick Warren. He ran it like that, but he built in somehow some protections for himself and some spirituality.
He seems to have done good. And look, there's so many mega churches in America. Yes. It's a really broad brush to look at one guy who's failed and go, it's all a mess. It's like, maybe not. And I was encouraged. I would encourage everyone to go. I forget the guest, but search the Carey Nieuwhof podcast, because it was a refreshing.
Some good stuff. Yeah.
Well, and it was a refreshing conversation between, they had the executive pastor and the head pastor on, who had somewhat recently walked through this situation where this guy basically was just really kind of nasty and abusive, and bullyish. Abusive is such a hard word, because it's, I don't know. It brings to mind so many things, but and maybe abusive isn't the right. But he was, he's just a bully and just a jerk, and he was running over.
Shouldn't have been up there.
Yeah.
Shouldn't have been up there.
And it was a fantastic conversation, because it was one of the very few conversations where they didn't have to fire him. He came back and he repented. He said, let's fix these things. They're making way. So it was actually a very redemptive conversation. I was very encouraged by it.
Yeah. And that's possible. And I think that should be what we try for.
Yeah. And there's tons of churches. I mean, one of the, the church I went to in university, is now, I guess for College Station would be kind of a mega church. They've got, 3 campuses and tons of different people going, and, it's fantastic. Or 4 campuses now, I guess.
Great stuff's going on.
And so, and very godly people, blah blah blah. I think what worries me though is even in this conversation with Carrie Newhoff, I was marked, or it was remarkable how little conversation there was about, I wasn't reflecting Jesus. And that's my first goal as a pastor.
Yeah.
There was some of that because he repented. He was like, yeah, I mean, I'm dealing with my own sin issues. And I mean, it was, so I don't want to besmirch the guy. It didn't seem like, he never said, you know what? I never really recognized that I had never focused on character, or I was putting so much into, we got confused with quote unquote success as godliness. And I think that's what concerns me, is we're very willing to dismiss character, lack of character, when things are going well. And then eventually it's going to, fall apart. And that concerns me.
Yep.
Paul doesn't seem, and maybe this is a very, I'm just processing here, but I don't remember Paul really giving much detail about skill set for leadership qualifications in the Bible. It seems to be mostly character. Mostly character. There may be skill set, but character seems to be of the utmost importance.
Develop skill set yet? I mean, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
they were making it up as they go along. So character was the most important. And I think that's why maybe you and I come at this a little different, as we've been in Europe, and in Europe, we're really just kind of everyone here is kind of making it up as we go along. And so it's not often that the skill set doesn't matter. We've just seen that, right? And so I'm not saying skill set doesn't matter. Skills, you need to get trained, you need to learn, you need to grow, you need to constantly be developing. But I would much rather have a leader who cares for his people, who's tied into Jesus, who is patient, who is kind, who exhibits, fruit of the Spirit. Just that you can work with. You can't work with a guy who's really skilled, but doesn't have those other things. And that's once again, I really want to emphasize this: read the business literature. It's the same. That's what they're saying.
Yeah,
they're saying your skill set doesn't mean a thing if you can't get the people around you to work with you. They don't have to like you, but they've got to trust you, and they've got to want to work with you, and you've got to be able to relate to them. And I mean, it's ridiculous what's interesting, some of this has become in Christian leadership literature.
Yeah, and what's interesting to me is, because I read Christian leadership books, and I'm so often disappointed because so much of it is skill set driven. Hey, here are the 5 principles you need to do. What was the book I sent you? Some dude wrote a book
marketing
on marketing
like Jesus, marketing like Jesus, stuff like that, which is, you're just like,
made me want to vomit. And yes, if you happen to read that book or know that author, please go and slap him. Should not be. I'm going to say that should not have. Christian publishers, you should never have published that book.
Please have a better title.
Oh my gosh, no! But there wasn't. I read all of the table of contents and everything of the book. It's a disaster from start to finish. Because I just don't. How are you going to market Jesus? You can't market Jesus. Go and die. Like, that's not marketable.
Like Jesus. It's not marketable. Death.
It's so
death does not sell.
No, it doesn't. Right. And so we can't write ourselves into that story.
Yeah.
And that's what marketing is. You write yourself into the story. Yeah. But okay, so much literature though is it does focus on maybe on skill set, or it focuses on like 9 principles to have a successful whatever.
Yeah.
So and success or goals or increase or all of these things. And I get that those things are important. We all want
of course.
Those things. Here's this often is my. I've mentioned this before, right? So I heard in college, the most successful people, if you write down your goals every semester, you're 9 times more likely to achieve them. And so everyone would write down their goals. I watched my roommate every semester write down his goals and then promptly not achieve any of them. And And I just always wondered, I see all these students around me writing down these goals and they're not really achieving them. So there must be an element. I get what it means to write something down, and then you're more likely to remember it. You're going to focus on that. You've spent time, you've slowed yourself down. That's the process. Okay, I get that. But there is also an element of people who are successful take time. So all that tells me is, hey, people who are successful sit down and take time to think. It's not the writing down of the goals, but everyone reads that sentence and goes, okay, I'm going to write down my goals.
Here's the magic.
Yeah. And here's the thing I got to
get rich quick. Yeah.
But the more appropriate chapter in that, or the more appropriate story for a student is, hey, if you want to be successful in life, spend time thinking about what you're doing and developing the character to focus. Yeah. That's the story. It's not the writing down, but we shorten that because we have to communicate it and everything else. And then everyone over time begins to think, oh, the main thing I have to do is, X, Y, and Z. And I think we take a lot of leadership books or materials and we take that into it, and everyone reads it and then thinks it's a formula that can be done. Really, in the end, it's do you really care about the person you're leading? Like,
exactly.
Small, maybe it's a pat on the back, maybe it's not, but okay, we had decent numbers of people who would join what we were doing in Sweden. And I am proud of that. Not an easy place to have achieved that. And at the end of the day, I've thought a lot about it. And I think really what it comes down to is the people who followed us. It wasn't because we were the greatest leaders. It wasn't like we had the greatest plans. It wasn't like we had the greatest discipline. It wasn't, but everyone who came knew that we wanted them there and knew that ultimately we cared about them. So whatever screw up I was going to make, I was going to try to undo it. Yeah. I wasn't afraid to go before anyone who I was leading and say, I was wrong on that. And that just wasn't godly, or, whatever else. I'm not saying that that's the most godly character in the world. I'm just saying it seemed that caring about the people you're working with and who are in front of you is by far the most important thing. That seems to me a key, and maybe Jesus-like, right?
Yeah. It might just a little. Yeah.
It's not to toot my own horn. That's not what I just need. You need a anecdote in order to.
Well, I think what you're hitting on is exactly right. It is the it is I think essentially what I think is the problem is we have fallen in this other pitfall. So one is the skill, the you can learn the skills, or you can kind of learn your way into leadership, but the other is that there's certain kind of people who are just really good leaders, right?
The great man of history,
and have they and so they have this. Some leaders aren't made, they're born. And I don't, once again, that's something that, okay, that's partially true. There are some people who just have some natural abilities, or they're good looking. Yeah, at least, right? They've got the right face for it, yeah, like us, and so there's that's a bad reading of leadership. I think these are two kind of sides of leadership that we tend to gravitate towards, like the Obamas, like, and I'm not saying Barack Obama was not a great leader, but he had a certain kind of je ne sais quoi. He had a certain kind of way charisma. He carried himself, right?
Yeah.
I think charisma, and that's great. That's a gift, and I don't think we should say, oh, I don't have it. But there's a danger side of that. But as I look at young leaders, or even my own leadership journey, there was a time when I thought, oh, I gotta aspire to some kind of, greatness. Or you go on the other side, which I think happens a lot of, is that we can just train it into you by giving you the skills, and which makes sense in an organization. We believe we can train people to do evangelism. We believe we can train people, and those are great things to do. But at the end of the day, if you drop what's really behind that, which is a heart for Jesus, a love for people, that it's all, and you lose it. So there's something in there, and I want to see more churches, more organizations focus on what is happening in the business world, which is the main question of leadership is not what to do, it's who you are. And so Dan Rockwell, so I highly recommend his blog. He has some of the best, just short little leadership things, articles that he does, fantastic stuff. And he's in this vein of like, it's not what you do. Yeah, you got to do stuff, but it's really, and well, it's Steve Cuss. Steve Cuss is what is leadership? It is he takes it from Friedman.
Mm-hmm.
It's unhurried, unanxious presence. It's being there. It's deciding, how am I going to show up today? Who am I going to be to the people around me and what they need, and not what am I going to accomplish? What can I get done? What can I do? Who can I be? What is my role? Roles are important, but the core identity of a leader is their core identity, and that is how they're to be seen and understood. And I don't think we're talking about that. We're not helping people find those things out. And I think too, the other thing is, if you make it all about roles and skills, when people mess up, I mean, because you're gonna mess up. I mean, you can't not mess up as a leader, and you failed, and it's hard to go back. But if it's just about who I am, how I treat people, well, you can always, that's something that can always get worked on, and it's in process. You're not there yet. No one's gonna get there, So I think a lot of this stuff, we've loaded a bunch of stuff on people of expectations, and made leadership even harder, maybe in some sense, when that's not what leadership is. It's how you show up. How are you gonna show up today? You can be mad, you can be angry, you're gonna yell at somebody, or you're gonna go in and go, all right, guys, love you guys, let's get it done. Well, let's get it done.
Yeah, and it's interesting because let's be quick to say there are veins of let's say leadership materials. You mentioned Steve Cuss. There's emotionally healthy spirituality from I always Pete Scazzaro,
something like that,
and others.
Capiche?
but they're often ignored, or maybe not as well known, and certainly not praised. So here's the other my other discomfort with let's say the milieu of leadership. The milieu of leadership is often has in it the tone of leadership materials, often has in it something sexy and something to be desired. But yet the leadership of Christ calls us to come and die. And it is a call to something exceedingly different. Character is difficult, a long process. It's not sexy, and it's really not desirable on the front end. So this is a discongruence for me in so much of the literature, because you can lead it and you go, okay, yeah, I'm going to do this and we're going to succeed. And it really just seems to play into our own ambitions. I'm not saying that every book on leadership needs to be about how much we suck, and you need to develop character. It doesn't need to be boring, and we need to achieve things. But so much of it is just this tone that plays into my own ambitions.
Yeah. And like I said, I do want to be careful. I'm not saying that we shouldn't. A lot of this stuff, I'm not saying it's bad. I think what we're saying is it's limiting and it's limited, and that's the big conversation. You and I are here. So we're not saying a CEO type leader of a church is a necessarily a bad thing, but if that's all that it is, it's limit. It's a problem. I think
I would say it is a very insufficient view of leadership.
Exactly,
for a Christian,
and one that's not particularly Christian. I would say it's not necessarily Christian.
Right.
So as a but it can be a model that can function, be very effective and
effective to what end though? This is my issue. It's like effective to the end of, I don't know, church growth, management, getting certain things done or achieved. Yeah, that's a certain amount of effectiveness. But is it effective in the kingdom? Like, what ultimately is Christ wanting to achieve in us?
Well, and that's what you hope is that side of it for that leader or those leaders is there and is incredibly prevalent. Unfortunately, I think in a lot of cases, not all of them, but it's not there. I mean, but let's just take it as if you're a seminary or a seminary president, you have to lead at some level executively, right? Or if you're Steve Sellers and crew, you have to lead at some level executively. You have to manage a large organization. The question is how are you doing that? How are you, so it's worthwhile to pick up some information about CEOs and stuff. I think that's fantastic. But if at the core of what you are as a leader is not defined by, I think, servant leadership, in how I would want to define things, I could be wrong. Then I think there is a problem, or but at some point you have to fit into those roles. You do have to admit that there are roles. We're very fortunate because we just lead small groups, missionaries who are just trying to get through the day, so we don't have to do too much of that. But
yeah, and it's the more it gets complex. I mean, in my last role, it obviously got more and more complex the bigger we got, and the more we were dealing with budget and things, and I needed to focus on skill sets that I needed to obtain. So none of that is not true. But I do get concerned for the stories that we tell our young leaders.
Exactly. I'm totally.
Or the picture that we have of leadership, that it is, is it really Jesus like?
Yeah. Come serve, come die. I mean, and this is, I've probably been a little bit too pushy this podcast, but I will challenge anyone to come to my house and wrestle me on this issue. The best book on leadership, Henry Nouwen, In the Name of Jesus. Every Christian leader needs to read that book. It'll take you an hour and a half, 2 hours to read it. It's fantastic because it is about this. It is this idea that being a leader is dying to yourself, principally, and it is giving up and letting go of things, and it is not looking for relevance or being cool or being, and that's I think that's just a problem. It's a dangerous world. A lot of people in the States particularly can get into, being as someone was told me, being a missionary or a pastor in certain countries, you're a rock star. In Western Europe, no one cares. So we're already kind of down but the reality is, a lot of pastors in the States, they've got 2,000-3,000 people who are looking to, not at least 200 or 400. And then, some of them have Twitter feeds, some of them are on TV, they're recognized in the community. They're important in the community, right? I mean, they're pastors in the US, serve on boards. They serve, most cities have some type of big city thing that ties in with the city government, and pastors are helping drive that to, to develop, so there's a lot of power, a lot of influence that goes into. You're well known, and in some cases you're super well known, you're famous, you're making money. And so those are temptations as well. Those are temptations to say, well, it's a lot of good being done there, but also a lot of ego feeding. So in some ways, I think that for those guys, it's even more necessary that they're tied into communities, that they have people closely walking with them, because there's so much temptation to fall in that ego trap. I think,
Yeah, I recently saw it. Maybe it was in a Spanish newspaper. I forget where I was reading it. Maybe it was a Swedish newspaper, but there's a survey done of like 20 somethings, it was 18 to 24-year-olds, and something like 75% of them hoped to be an influencer.
Yeah. It's even worse now.
Well, and I think if you use that word influence and you ran it by most people in Christian leadership, they would say that's one of the most important things you can have as a leader's influence. Mm-hmm. And that is leadership to some extent. It's influence. I think Gary Runn defines it as that. But my concern is that we're willing to sacrifice most. We can be willing, and when I say we, I mean me. There have been times in my life where I was where the desire to have influence, to have a seat at the table, to try to, help advance the ball of the kingdom, mm-hmm. so to speak. It wasn't that I was willing to do anything, but I desperately wanted to be there, if that makes sense. And some of my own ambitions, that goes into some of my own story of, this desire to, for greatness and different things. So that's, sin that I'm unlearning and sanctifying. But it really is, I think, concerning to me. Not concerning. There's nothing necessarily wrong with influence, as long as you have the character,
Yeah.
to understand the smell of your own junk.
Yeah.
But too often, and I don't know how to do it, I confess limiting principles or limiting. I think I'm at a loss to say, well, this is how you gain influence and still remain humble.
Yeah.
So often we as humans burn our wings off because we fly a little bit close to the sun.
Yeah.
So I don't know how to do that, but the surefire way is you work on developing character. You, like you said, you have a close group of people around you who don't let you do that. It seems to me, though, that so often, in order to rise to the position of influence, the way in which that's done is often advantage to the person who is a loner and who's willing to hide.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like the transparent person, the humble person, I think could rise to that, but often it's the person with blind ambition.
Yeah.
So it's a tough thing.
If you're a good speaker, if you're a good communicator, I mean, that's gold, it's a great skill to have, an ability to work on. But if there's not much behind it, then, I mean, let's be honest, Ravi Zacharias' key person, Mark Driscoll, guys who are tremendous communicators for the gospel, but treated people horribly.
Yeah.
In the end, and built up systems that allowed them to, and I don't think that any of them started out to do that. No,
probably not.
And so my question, I think it'd be interesting to pose this, but if you were to pose to most pastors or Christian leaders, and ask them, what kind of leader do you aspire to be, or how do you define leadership? I think it'd be interesting to see what responses you would get, because I think a lot of people are leading without thinking about leading, which is another, I think, pitfall. Because if you actually do read a lot, once back to business leadership, and you mentioned this, but one thing you have to do is you have to think about how you are as a leader right now. You have to evaluate, and a lot of them will even say at the end of every day you should spend 15 minutes to sit down and reflect on how you acted that day, how you treated people, what kind of leader were you that day, and is that lining up with your personal goals as leaders, your personal desire of what kind of leader you want to be. And I don't think we do that. I don't think we kind of I really do think a lot of evangelical circles, not all, we're just scratching the surface of what leadership really is. Not really. We just go, well, look, he's successful. That's great leadership. And I think there's just a lot of people in the Christian world and outside Christian world say, no, that's not success, and that's not good leadership.
So, but do you think it is? I think I answered my question as I was thinking about it. I was gonna say, do you think it's more desirable to have small people be leaders over small groups of things rather than big leaders? Eventually you have to grow and you have to be bigger, but also there's really terrible, abusive, arrogant leaders of small things, and terrible, abusive leaders of big things. So it's kind of a stupid thought.
It's a catch. Well, there's it's hard to get away from people's sin and people's failures, and I prefer, I mean, I like small.
Yeah.
I think Mike Schatzman and I talked about writing a blog called Leading Small. And that's got a lot what we do in Europe, or in a lot. I mean, probably most leaders in the world are leading small, right?
Right.
But they probably don't think they're leaders. And I think that's what another thing I've kind of realized is a lot of people are leading. They don't realize they're
something.
Yeah. And sometimes they're doing a great job, but they haven't put the framework, the vocabulary together to go, or talk to other people. Like that was one thing we did in Spain. We started having young leaders and old leaders talk to each other and realize, oh, well, that's a problem for you too. I thought I was alone in that issue. And that was a light really came on with the fact that if you can talk about leadership with somebody and not make it feel like I'm being trained, but I'm just like, you realize you got a lot of stuff you got to learn yourself too. I mean, I'll just say that too. I think a lot of it, but if you're not thinking about it, I think it's a big error. And if someone's not kind of facilitating or in your life some internal dialogue or conversation,
yeah,
you're missing out.
Yeah. So the moral of the story, the moral of the podcast, is focus on your character.
Yeah.
The skill set will come. Or you can focus on the prioritize character. Maybe that's the best way to say it. Prioritize character. That character development is hard, long, slow, but of the utmost importance. Skill development is quick, easy, and without character detrimental.
Yeah.
Or possibly detrimental.
I totally agree. And characters more than not sinning.
Yeah.
I think that's another problem we have is we go, oh, well, I'm not doing drugs. I'm not, sleeping around. I'm not, but characters some of these guys who've been bullies or have been abusive or not been very good leaders, I'm sure had impeccable moral behind, lives, right?
The big moral stuff, or quote unquote,
right. Stuff. But how do you treat people? I think, that's how are you, interacting with the people you lead, how's your relationship with Jesus? I think that those are also, character
yeah issues. I mean, I think character, I think we could go in so far as to define character by, the classic is, what you do when no one is watching. But also I think character might very well be, do you have the internal fortitude, internal understanding to know when you're pushing someone because you have anxiety about not living up to your father's expectation or your own personal expectation of what you think a leader should be, when you want to quickly bite someone's head off. Like that's what I mean by character. I think it's more of like, that produced anxiety in me. That's why I think Steve Cuss's stuff is so important. Or that I think I need to have all the answers as a leader because I'm afraid that people will see through me. Like that's character, to go, I'm not well. And I need to focus on this. And then character, I would say, is also going back to your people and saying, I threw so-and-so under the bus yesterday and that was wrong. And here's why it was wrong. So I don't think it means having impeccable, perfect character. I think it means the character to be honest, open, kind, apologetic, forgiving. It's humility.
It's humility.
Ultimately. And so what's interesting is you can write a book on that. You can say, okay, these are the 7 things, you need to do to develop character, but you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. And so people aren't going to change and move towards that direction unless they want to. But I think we would do well to start talking about it at least, right?
Amen. I think so. I think we should kind of spin off on this. I think there's a couple people we could have on that would be really. One would be Gary Runn, who is kind of a leadership guru, and I think very much agree. I've read his dissertation and very much agrees with us on a lot of this. And another guy, Robin Pugh, who's a coach and consultant for Fortune 500. He's a friend of mine. We tried to get him on last year, and he wanted to come on, but we were busy. But I think this year would be good. But I think at least should end with a quote from Gary Runn in his organization, Vocare. I don't know how you say that. Vocare. I don't know how you say it. His org.
No, it's Volare. Vola is that song.
Volare. Oh. This is Vocare, which probably means something important.
I think it's in Italian, right?
It might be Italian. But he says leadership always works. Sometimes it works towards great good, and sometimes it results in great evil. But because leadership is a highly leveraged responsibility, it always works. Genuine humility, wisdom, and character are required. Genuine humility, wisdom, and character are required. I think hey, instead of listening to this, we should go back to the front and say, instead of listening to this podcast,
why don't you just go talk to Gary?
Go talk to Gary Wren. Yeah. But it was a great conversation, because I think you got to scratch at these things and talk about it. And
yeah, obviously we're just scratching the surface here.
Yeah.
Or hinting at scratching the surface. I don't even know. Well, like I said, you and I are going to write a leadership book and call it, I don't know, something tongue in cheek.
We got to have a good line.
What not to do. Lessons from my life. Well, the road goes on forever, but this podcast. Yeah. Where did I get podcast? Oh, anyway, too long of a story. No, yeah. Anyway, there's a podcast I listen to that at the end, he always says, we'll see you next time. And then he has his guests say, no, you won't. This is a podcast. Anyway, and so it's often like people who can speak other languages, and he always has them say it in different languages, and they always say podcast. Blah, blah, blah. We can eliminate that. This podcast does not go on forever.
Does not go on. Well, yeah.
Will not go on forever.
The party, yeah.
But the party never ends. Great talking to you. Glad to be back in action. Looking forward to the next time we talk. And hey, people out there, tell someone about this podcast if you like it. If you don't like it, tell someone about it anyway. And you can then tell them, I tricked you. No. Anyway, we'd love to have
revenge podcasting.
Word spread. Listen, we do actually realize that you guys, this podcast is something we've heard from a lot of you that it's just nice to have a place where you can talk about some of these, or hear conversation about some of these topics that maybe aren't necessarily taken up. We realize that sometimes we're just coming at it from a different angle. It's all part of the conversation. If you want to join in on the conversation, send us an email, barrett.harkins@crew.org, garrick.regner@crew.org.
Yeah. Or on Facebook,
wherever I'm not on the Twitter these days.
Wherever you social network.
Yeah, find us, and we'd love to hear from you. Love to hear your thoughts. Any topics of conversations you'd like to have us interact with. We may or may not take those up, but it's always nice to have suggestions. Okay, that's a mouthful, Garrick. We'll see you next time, man.
You see you.
No, you want this podcast.